Hi, welcome back to the Sales Genius Podcast, where today we're diving into the groundbreaking negotiation strategy that's redefining how deals are closed in the 21st century. Our guest is Derrick Chevalier, the Executive Vice President of Harrison-Chevalier and the mastermind behind the CNSUF framework, which he'll have to talk to us about, right? Derrick's career spans over 25 years, coaching leaders from boardrooms to war rooms, helping them exceed goals through world-class negotiations. So if you're serious about mastering the art of influence and persuasion, this is your episode where you need to future-proof your negotiation skills, and we're going to make sure you get that going now. So let's go ahead and kick ourselves off right now.
This podcast is for the sales professionals at every level. If you want to convert more prospects into paying customers, then you're in the right place. Because Joe has spent the last 3 decades mastering buying behaviors, personality types, emotional and logical triggers. This is the Sales Genius Podcast. It's only a numbers game if you want educated. It's time to get educated. Let's go. Educated. Wanna learn how to close deals. Wanna learn how to sell more. That's what we're here for at Sales Genius. Let's go.
It was funny, last week we were sitting there and I was like, I had to stop the guest trainer from bobbing his head the whole time. I'm like, hey, come back. We're going to be talking. So let me bring some VIPs back up on the stage. Coach Dan Gordon is with us. Brian Galke at Sales Skills. Jesse is here with us. Welcome, guys. Now, Derrick, I need you to come up here. Then I want to move us all around a little bit. So we'll go over here and say, no, Derrick, you take the big spot and come in.
Oh, I get the big spot.
You
Hey,
get
I
all the
love that
focus.
music. Love
Yes.
that music.
Hey, we got outro music too. That's cool. But again,
Love
it's just
it.
me saying we got to get our heads moving to get going. So, Derrick, now you've worked with everybody from sales pros to engineers to political strategists, right?
Yep.
What is one mistake that you see across the board when it comes to negotiation, and how do you address it so that they don't make those mistakes?
So one element that I think that is important is I think that people negotiate problems. And I also think people negotiate against themselves across the board. So the first part of that is that a SNUF axiom, if you will, CNSUF, is negotiate people, not problems or challenges. The problems, for instance, for a salesperson, you've got an obstacle, your objective, you want to sell, and you've got some obstacles along the way. So often people focus on what they're driven by. They want to sell something, or if they're on the procurement side, they want to save some money. And so they focus on that sale or on that reduction in cost, as opposed to focusing on the individual they're negotiating with. And that is a huge problem.
All right. So again, one of the things you said was negotiate people, not the problem.
Right. Negotiate people, not problems or challenges.
Okay.
Because here's the thing. The problem is inanimate. In other words, I need to sell something. I need to sell something to every person. If I'm a salesperson, I need procurement people are given a savings quota at the beginning of the year. They got to save some money. And so what are they focused on? Saving money or selling. And by focusing on either saving or selling, or wherever they are in that transition, they are missing the opportunity to actually achieve what they want to do, because they're using the same bag of tricks for everybody they're working with. And that's the one variable that changes, right? It's not the objective. If you're selling, you want to sell. But what does change with that? The people that you are selling to, and the people that are they are responsible to during that process. So we focus on designing a strategy using tools that are selected for a specific sales, a specific human being, and a specific time.
Okay, so are we teaching people how to do more of an analytical assessment of their, for lack of a better word, opponent or the person sitting across from them?
Well, absolutely. I would argue that, and we certainly argue within the evolved negotiation framework, that today, if you're using, and most people are, they're using tactics and strategies that were developed by my mentor, Chester Karras, who is the #1 to this day, #1 negotiation trainer. They have workshops all over the world, bar anybody, and many people combine. They're still using stuff from the 50s and 60s without having it tailored and realizing that in this day and age, everything is neurophysiological. It's all about neurophysiology. That is the entire input and purpose of AI. It is to understand the neurophysiological motivations of the people we're interacting with, and then to move the needle, everything in marketing, everything on social media. So, of course, in the 21st century, we've got to be focused on the neurophysiology of the human being that we're dealing with, because what we dealt with or what we did for somebody else is going to return a diminishing return.
Derrick, where do people's heads go when they're in a negotiation?
Great question. To their BATNA, which comes out of the Harvard framework, best alternative to a negotiated agreement, or it goes to their outcome, to their focus on their outcome. So if you let's just take that idea. Another one would be never split the difference. But let's look at this idea of that's going on right now, aiming high. So I have an objective and I aim high, and then according to Karras, which is where that came from, I give in slowly. That's across the board that people use that. Well, first of all, let's debunk the idea of aiming high. If you go into a negotiation and you're aiming high, whether you're on the buying or the selling side, who are you actually negotiating against?
Yourself.
You're negotiating against yourself.
I'm trying to pack myself to get me to believe a number that's wrong.
Yeah. Right. So, and then you take away the BATNA, best alternative to negotiated agreement. So let's say Dan has a BATNA and I have a BATNA. So who was in the room when we came up with those BATNAs? We were. So we go into a room focused on that BATNA. And then when we chase that BATNA and Dan says, hey, Derrick, I'm not going to get you to your BATNA. That's not happening. Then I say, well, it's time to invoke that BATNA. It's time to me to invoke the alternative I had available before I walked into the room. And that is exactly where the best outcome lies, because I never focused on why Dan was unwilling to provide information during that negotiation or during that process that he had never been able to negotiate or to share with me previously. So I go out, fall on my BATNA, the best deal is still in the room. Or more commonly, people come up with something that is a compromise between their high or BATNA and what the other person is offering. And then you have people going, and the common language for that is called win-win. And we clearly believe that the reason people feel so great about a win-win outcome is generally because somebody got screwed. So if we, last year we did a survey of almost 2 million people, and we asked them, how do you know that the outcome was win-win? Vast majority of people came back and said, well, if I feel good about the outcome. Now, if you're negotiating with a snuff negotiator who will identify the fact that you're negotiating based upon your feelings, then your feelings are exactly what I'm going to negotiate. And my objective will be to make you feel good, so that when you walk out of the room, you go, that was great. That was great. I feel good too, because I got a bunch more from you than I got from somebody else who was more skilled. So
I agree. I use win-win whenever I'm trying to make sure they lose.
yeah, exactly. It's a
Right.
misnomer. It's a complete misnomer, the idea. And here's why, from a quantitative standpoint, in the snuff framework that we say that it's a misnomer. It's a misnomer because people are negotiating more often than not based upon what they know. So a snuff negotiator is not interested in what they know. They're also not that interested in their own perspective. They already know what their perspective is. What they're focused in is, what don't I know, right, about Brian? Or what don't I know about his background, his thinking, his training? Or what isn't Brian telling me during the course of a negotiation that beyond what he's already shared with me? So at the end of the day, a snuff negotiator does not measure the outcome of a negotiation based upon what we thought when we went in. We're more likely to determine the outcome of a negotiation based upon how much of that outcome was based upon information or data we didn't have when we walked into the room. Okay. So obviously our focus and our purpose is to get Dan or whoever to come to a place where he's willing to share information that he is previously been unwilling to share. That's what we're doing there. Okay.
So I want to use your skill set here. So Jesse and I work with sales teams. Meaning, like, we are going to present to our salesperson who is now going to go present to somebody else, right? So more often than not, I tell all my guys, I'm like, I know as a good salesperson, you work me and you work your customer, right? To try to get to that common ground. And so to me, my question is, how do I set up, being that I'm removed from the actual client in this scenario where I'm the one coaching and giving the final say-so or permission, but now the person is going to go have that conversation and then reporting back to me from whatever their viewpoint is.
Exactly. Well, we call that stealth negotiation, and we do it all over the world. Stealth negotiation is where we're actually in the room without the knowledge of the counterpart that our client might be negotiating with. So in a scenario like that, again, combining these two things, if your client goes in looking to find out whether or not someone is willing to pay the price that they're asking, then they're going to ask a lot of questions about whether or not you're ready to pay the price that your client is asking. Well, that makes it difficult for them not to put themselves in a position where they may make a commitment or refuse to make a commitment or not understand how, what to do before they get back to you. But in a nutshell, the actual skill that we would teach a client is a methodology for caucusing. So if you're a professional salesperson and you don't have 3 or 4 techniques for caucusing, that is for stopping the negotiation and then being able to step back and look at your methodology, or to go back and get input from Joe or John or anybody else, then you're lacking a critical skill.
All right. So now, to me, the caucusing is that stuff around the tub, right?
I love it. I love it. Love it.
So as you're saying caucusing, that's getting the consensus of the group of people that are there?
So all we're talking about is let's say that we're in negotiation. Your client is in negotiation with their, vendor, depending on if they're selling, they're talking to a vendor. And what the first thing that you will have trained them to do is to essentially do reconnaissance. That's what they're doing on that first part of that call. So I would identify your job now is reconnaissance, right? And the first question I would have is, one, you want to verify all of the facts and data that you have, right? To make sure that what they've provided you and what you understand to be their position and their rationale is still valuable and accurate. The next step that they would go into is the objective of actually finding out whether or not that vendor was willing to give them additional information or data that they had previously been unwilling to provide. Now, so if they ask a question about additional information, perhaps they ask the question like, listen, beyond yourself, who else is going to be involved in the decision-making process? Now, if the vendor would say, well, no, I'm calling that shot, there's nobody else involved. If you're talking about any significant salesperson who is not a senior executive, one thing you can be sure of, they're not telling you the truth.
They're lying right there.
Thank you.
Nope, you're lying.
Yeah. So at that point, one of the things that person has done for you is to identify something about their sales strategy or their buying strategy, depending again on what side of the ball you are. But if I'm willing to lie to you about the decision maker in that process, does that indicate that I might be willing to fudge, to lie, or to short, or send you in a different direction from an ethical or moral position on any other question? And the answer would be yes. Mm-hmm. So what I've actually done at that point is limit the risk of your client, because all we know is that they just fibbed to us. At that point, all that your client would have to do is hey, wait a second, I've got another call. Let me just tell them I'll get back to them. Boom, put them on hold, go back, and they're back to you. Now, you would then connect those dots. You're talking to someone who is willing to lie to you. So that is therefore going to help you understand what mode of negotiation you are you're actually involved with. So if we look at the research, which says people believe that if they've been negotiating with someone for a long period of time and that there have been satisfactory outcomes, most people assume that the other person is ethical, that they are not using negotiating tactics or strategy. They tend to believe what they say. So that if I ask that person, and we frequently will suggest that a client ask a question they already know the answer to, because what we're then doing is giving that person an opportunity to identify themselves. So if we have someone that is willing to fib about the decision-making process, then they might come back to you. The caucus would simply be, hey, I got another call coming in. Let me just quickly tell them that I will call them back in 30 minutes. They put that person on hold. They then called you. We call a caucus the opportunity. In this case, they would be talking to you before they've actually created any damage or offered anything of substance. And then we would clarify for them where they are in the negotiating process, which is, that speaks to the mode of negotiation that we're in. Now, from our research, we know that if we ask somebody, a salesperson who's been, let's say, working with a counterpart for a long time, we'll say, well, how do you know that you can trust them? Well, we've done a lot of deals together. Well, I've known them for 7 years. Now, those are phenomenally big presumptions on the part of that salesperson, right? If you look at the equation, we've been doing business for 7 years, so therefore you're being honest with me. Now, in 30 seconds, I just found out that you're fibbing to me. It's a pretty good bet that you fibbed to me in the past, that you'll fib to me now, and you'll fib to me in the future. So we're going to identify for that client the fact that we are now where you started out in a presumptive cooperative mode of negotiation. That answer, which was a fib, moves you to the competitive mode.
Okay. All right. So hold on. I'm building out a framework, which I know you're like, dude, I already have it. Go to the website on the screen and click the button, buy something, right? Which I suggest everybody do. But,
well, thank you. But I'm happy to be here and share. It's great and learn.
I'm going to do my recon work where I'm verifying what you got me. So let's say I get a request online. So they come through. They're like, this is what I'm interested in. But I can see that. I can see what they put in, what the comments are, right? So now I'm going to take that. Now I verify with them when I get them on and go, so this is the product you were looking for, this, and this, right? And this is your situation. But then now I want to start asking to get some additional data, right? To try to validate and push them forward. And I assume as soon as I start doing that, am I not going to run into some kind of apprehension or something on their side going, whoa, slow down? Yeah.
Absolutely. And you've done programs on it. That would be where you pull up that rerun on objections, because you know that you're going to get an objection. The question is, what objection do you get? That's number one. So if you're a competent, especially if you're a snuff negotiator, you know that when an objection comes up, you have the skill to either neutralize that or remove it or to replace it, right? So we're either going to neutralize it, we're going to remove it, or we're going to make another suggestion. We're going to overcome it in one way or another. So yes, we should anticipate, but here's the thing. If I go into a negotiation and I was to say something like, well, I asked Dan, I say, well, Dan, how old are you?
I'm 62.
Okay. So what's your birthday?
June 15th.
Okay. So what did I just learn? First of all, Dan was willing to tell me how old he is. I don't know that that's true, but I did test it, didn't I? I attempted to test it by saying, well, what's your birthday? Now, given the data that Dan provided, can I verify that Dan is 62? No, I cannot. Why? Because Dan left out a key piece of data. Now, here's the importance of that data. Do I know that Dan 100% knows what the answer is to that question?
Yes, I would.
Yeah. So what I found out, and if we dig a little deeper, and I was in live or on a virtual call with Dan, I would have been looking at how Dan answered those two questions. Because what I would have been looking for is, number one, when he left out the year, it took a nanosecond before he decided to do that. And also, if you go back and run the tape, you'll notice that I said, oh, well, when's your birthday? And he said, June. I don't know if you know, but I looked at precisely where his eyes went into his glasses. Now, what do I know? I know that throughout the sales presentation, every time Dan is hesitating, eliminating something, excluding something from an answer, he's going to make that exact same eye movement. That's where you have neurophysiology that comes into it. So now we're tracking whether or not Dan is telling us the truth, all the truth, some of the truth, or perhaps none of the truth.
Hey, my name's not even Dan. So
exactly. I was going to say that. I'm like, he's not Dan. And if his mouth is moving. Oh, no.
Okay, but Derrick,
Yeah.
what do you do with that, right? Like, if you're in a negotiation, you don't score points by going, "You're a liar."
Well, so you asked two questions. The first one was, what does you do with that? And then
Yeah.
you made a assumption, which is that you would say you are a liar. Well, because you would not say that you're a liar. Now, there are situations in which I might expose the fact that someone was withholding data. That would be depending on the level of competition in the relationship. But for me, it's not about whether or not I tell you that I know you're a liar. It's about the fact that you've given me instructions about where I am in the negotiation process. Now, if I know that you're withholding information, am I more likely to then give you additional information that I had not previously given you, or am I less likely to do that?
Standard person, less likely.
Well, so the answer to his question is I would respond appropriately. Once I understand and establish that we're in a competitive mode, that positioning in the competitive mode is ultimately where I'm going to negotiate from. Right. So if I'm in a competitive mode, that then dictates both the closing techniques, the strategies, and the format at which I'll come at you, right? So that I'm not going to give you new information until I have either completely verified that you're unwilling to share any additional information. If I know that again dictates where we are in the negotiation process. So what I do with it is I read the tea leaves and understand you're telling me you're not giving me additional information. You're not being forthcoming when I ask a simple question. And it might not be that one. That was just an example. And you're not moving in any other direction than where you are. Well, at that point, you've told me where I am in the negotiation process. And then depending on a lot of factors, I'll make a judgment about either which objection I might address or which closing strategy I might respond with, given that scenario.
All right. So let me go in because I've been asking all the questions. Anybody else have a question? Dan already asked questions. He loves that. So Brian, Jesse, any questions on negotiating with Derrick?
A lot of information. Very good information.
Can you give us more examples of like information you already know is correct, but you're going to go in to see how they answer it?
Okay, so let's give a sales scenario. Let's say it's in the automotive because I work with a lot of people in automotive. So let's say that the pricing that we're going after a component for an engine, let's say, and I'm buying raw material from you, okay? And so what you presented me is a quote regarding how, based upon what I've asked for, how many units I'm going to buy, blah, blah, blah. And you give me a quote, and the quote is based upon your pricing model. So I look at the quote. I might start by saying, according to the quote that I have, as I understand it, the cost is $3.47 per pound with a volume of 3,000 pounds. All right. Now, if you simply said to me, yeah, that's correct. That's right. You verified that what you've said is what's on there, and that's what your understanding is. Now, I will tell you, 7 out of 10 times, you are not going to say, yes, that's correct. What you're going to do is say, oh, that quote was from 2 months ago. If you're in an talking about selling in an environment right now, almost none of the data somebody received 3 days ago is verifiable today. You're right. You're in what we call a negotiation state of flux in which everything is changing. So the first thing is to verify the facts. And this comes out of our Evolve or Be Slaughtered, the book there's a chapter there about effective communication. So in the SNUF framework, effective communication is quite different than most people define it as well. Effective communication for us is defined as congruence of meaning. It is not the exchange of information, which is what most professional salespeople are doing. They're spewing facts or spewing the spiel that they've been told to spew, or whatever was successful for them on their last sales experience. What they're not doing is understanding that congruence of meaning, right? And so if I'm verifying a set of facts, I might say, so Brian, as I understand it, according to the quote, XYZ is correct. And you might say, yeah, that's absolutely right. Boom, verified, move on. Now, 7 out of 10 times, what Brian's going to say is, well, no, in March, when we actually provided your order, that was true, but there have been some changes since that time. Now you're going to give me some additional information and tell me what those changes are. And I would say, so as I understand it, since between March and today, in May 21st, there have been the following changes. And you might say, yeah, Derrick, that's absolutely right. And it's at that point that we have a congruence of meaning. That doesn't mean that all it means is that you agree that I understand exactly what your point of view is. I will guarantee to your listeners that when you ask a question like that, and I ask the question, so as I understand it, which we all know is reframing, this set of facts is true. So, Brian, as I understand what you said, these are the changes that have taken place, right? Now, what's going to happen is Brian's going to say, well, yeah, no, not quite. I know what I meant to say was, and then you're going to clarify further or give me further additional information around that explanation. And we're going to play that game until we've reached a congruence of meaning. You agree that I understand the specific points that we're discussing. Now, again, that becomes a framework or a foundation from which to build my negotiation strategy.
All right. I got it. Any other questions we got? Because we're at 2:35, so we're hitting here. So does anybody have any other questions before I throw in one? Dan, Brian, Jesse? No.
Sir.
No, we're good. All right. So then this is just selfish for all the listeners that are out there. I need one sneaky, stealthy negotiation tip that if I'm sitting across from somebody negotiating, right, on a product or a service, give me one thing that I should be doing that's going to help me with the upper hand.
One thing. Yeah, I'm not good with one size fits all, but I will
give you 27 things.
I will give you one behavior. I would say this, it comes to this, to adjust your definition of these three terms: price, cost, and value 100% of the time. So the first thing I would ask you to do is to ask yourself those questions and answer it. Now, I will also predict that when you buy a copy of Evolve or Be Slaughtered, I say in that book, ask yourself this question: what is price, what is cost, and what is value? Then I ask you to write it down. I will tell you and to your audience, most of your audience is going to find their answer in Evolve, because I've asked hundreds of thousands of people. So the question is, what is price? Any one of you, what is price? It's real quick, because I know we're running time. What is price? First thing that comes to mind.
The amount that someone's asking for a product or service.
What is cost?
What it truly costs them to produce it.
And what is value?
The perceived dollar amount I assign to the product or service.
So we turn that around and we would say this, because we're looking for universal principles where there are no exceptions. And 100% of the time, price only involves three elements. And Joe, you hit them in a way. Here you go. Price always involves decimals, dollars, or percentages, period, the end. That's it. Has nothing to do with cost, has nothing to do with value, nothing. So price, all I'm looking at is a decimal percentage or a dollar amount in whatever thing. When it comes to cost, 100% of the time, anybody on this call, cost only has one definition, and it's one word, and that is liability. Cost is any tangible or intangible liability. So then third, what is value? Well, value occurs where you have benefits over liability equals value. Where you have perceived value, price is no longer an issue.
Ooh, I like that.
If there's an objection around the dollar, the decimal, or around the percentage, then we did not establish enough benefits over the perceived tangible or intangible liability, so that we know exactly where we need to go back in that sales cycle and ramp back up. You do that, and you're gonna do a lot more business. You're gonna be a lot smarter. You're gonna not less emotional, and you're certainly gonna be smarter than the even above average salesperson who's out there.
Fantastic. Derrick, thank you so much. I'm going to tell everybody, h-c.com. Go down there. You can actually request an evaluation or a conversation with Derrick. Reach out to him in LinkedIn. It's in the show notes below. Also in the show notes below is a link to Amazon for Evolve or Be Slaughtered Negotiation for the 21st Century. And that is a updated 2025 edition. So I would suggest you guys go in, because we threw out a lot of stuff with some PNAP, vapor, and other words. I made all those up, right, for acronyms that we were talking about before, right? But when you look at this and say, hey, I need to take my negotiation skills to a level beyond where I'm at, that's where you reach out to Derrick. That's where you grab the Evolve or Be Slaughtered book and get yourself in contact, and then practice, drill, rehearse, and get yourself so you actually can do something productive. But
thank you.
That myself is what I'm going to say right now to get done. And so, oh, Sandy did say that cost is sacrifice. She was answering the questions, but she said, please say it again. What is value?
Value is benefit over liability equals value.
There we go. Done to the point. Thank you so much. So I appreciate you, Derrick.
What a privilege.
You
guys are the best. You guys are the best. I really, and I've enjoyed some of the shows, so I'll keep looking and catching up. So thank you so much for the privilege.
My pleasure. Let's go through. So hang tight, everybody, and I'm going to go ahead and kick us out on the outro right now.
Let's talk about sales, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the challenges that may be. Let's talk about sales. A little bit.
And we're